All right, well, why don't we go ahead and just start with some introductions while folks keep filing into the room. And then we're going to jump right into some great data. So welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here. I'm Amanda Ryman. I am the Chief Knowledge Officer for New Frontier Data. New Frontier Data is an insights company that helps brands, retailers, and others in the cannabis space better understand who their customers are, how to attract new customers, and a bit about the why behind cannabis consumption, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about today. Christine, I'm so happy to have you here. You're such a powerhouse in the industry, and your knowledge of retail and all things cannabis is really unbelievable and vast. So please take a minute and introduce yourself.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me, Amanda and New Frontier Data. Always so excited to be on these webinars with you. Find you to be like one of the most awesome companies in cannabis. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Christine De La Rosa. I am the CEO and co-founder of the People's Ecosystem, which is our operating company. I am the managing member of the People's Group, which is a fund that specifically invests in BIPOC and women-led cannabis operators. I'm also the founder of the People's DAO, D-A-O, which is like a community bank, but in the metaverse. I have been in the legacy market and now in the legal market, and I have been very excited since the beginning of my career in cannabis to be part of this community, because although it is an industry, we are definitely a community.
I love it. Yes. And it was such a community. You know, we're going to talk about dispensaries today. Mm-hmm. And I know that Christine and I both remember very early dispensaries. And That was actually how I got involved in the cannabis space to begin with, was as a PhD student in social welfare and going to early medical cannabis dispensaries in the Bay Area and recognizing how they were operating as community health service providers in addition to cannabis providers, and that the community piece was definitely a huge part of early dispensaries, of course, being driven by the community aspects of the HIV/AIDS community here in San Francisco. And as we'll see, and when we're looking at the dispensary experience today, you know, that feeling of familiarity, of comfort, of security, of community is still driving people to dispensaries today and maintaining loyalty to the dispensaries that they love. So I'm really excited to have this conversation to dive a bit deeper into who dispensary customers are. So just a couple housekeeping things. If you have any questions for us, feel free to put them in the Q&A. If they're relevant to what we're talking about at the time, we'll answer them in program. If there's something we want to wait till the end, we'll have some time at the end to address some questions and answers as well. But I think we're going to kick things off with a poll to find out a little bit more about who's in the room. Our trusty back-end New Frontier technician, would you like to put our poll up there? All right, so let's go ahead and take the poll. And then we will show you the answers when we get closer to the end of the webinar. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Second. All right. So everyone should be able to see that. Go ahead and move us. All right. Perfect. All right. I'm going to go ahead and start the dispensary experience. So, you know, as I mentioned before, a lot of the early medical cannabis dispensaries were more than just sellers of cannabis. They were a place that people went to get information and education, not only about different cannabis products, but really how to use cannabis. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the modern dispensary consumer and what they're looking for when they go into a brick and mortar store. So let's start with a bit about the demographics. And, one of the things I want to point out is that what we're finding is that dispensary consumers really aren't that different from your average consumer when it comes to demographics. So what we see is that 43% of current consumers in adult use markets report brick and mortar dispensaries as their primary source, which means that there's 57% in adult use markets that are using either delivery or they're using unlicensed or unregulated market sources in order to get their cannabis. So less than half. And I think that that's important. Christine, does that jive kind of with what you've been experiencing?
I think so. I think a lot of things that are happening right now in the markets is that we still have a very robust legacy market or unregulated market. And so I think that dispensaries in the legal market are having to compete with this unregulated market that they might not have anticipated when they decided to open their doors. But there is a way to move legacy consumers over to legal consumers if you know the secret. Should we tell them?
Oh, I kind of like, should we tell them now, or should we build up some tension?
Let's build up the tension.
Okay. So we're going to build up the tension about how you get those consumers, that 57% that is not currently using a brick and mortar dispensary, how you get them into your store, and how you develop loyalty. So we will definitely get to that. When we look at age, again, not that different from your average consumer. We see the biggest age group being those 35 to 54. And age 18 to 34 being the second most popular. And then, of course, split between male and female is something that we see in a lot of different data sources around who is using cannabis. When we look at relationship status and children, we see that most dispensary customers are married or in a relationship, and that 40% have children under the age of 18. And not too long ago, a few months ago, I put out a report for New Frontier on millennial consumers. And this was one of the things that we really explored, is what is the cannabis consumption behavior for those that have young children at home? And unsurprisingly, a desire to access manufactured products and other things that can be consumed more stealthily is something that's very popular among those that have young children at home. And so one of the reasons that they may be using dispensaries is to have access to those types of products. Oh. All right, so let's share our results for our poll real quick so you can see. Hopefully everyone can see that. So let's see. So most folks here are in the THC space. We've got retail, of course, that makes a lot of sense given our topic today. Most folks are in marketing and branding or are founders or chief executives in their role. Have you ever purchased? So 82% of you have purchased cannabis from a brick and mortar dispensary. So as we're having this discussion, I would encourage you to think about yourself and some of the decisions that you make about whether or not to access a dispensary and what's driving those decisions. Because it looks like product quality is what's the most important thing to you all, followed by product selection, friendly, knowledgeable staff, also up there. And we will be talking about the role of bud tenders as well. All right. All right, so let's get back into our discussion of dispensaries and who they are. So let's look at the consumers. All right, so income. Now, I think a lot of this, and Christine, I'm curious to hear what you think as well, but when we look at the relationship between income and customer, I think a lot of this is driven by younger age groups. And, the fact that people that are 18 to 34 may be on the lighter side of income, where folks that are making more may not be using dispensaries because they're older, although we do see 6% of dispensary customers are making more than $200,000 a year. Looking at acquisition frequency, a couple times a month is the most common when people are purchasing cannabis. And most folks that are using brick and mortar dispensaries are not supplying family and friends with cannabis. So they're coming in a couple times a month, they're buying for themselves, and their income range tends to be between $25,000 and $75,000 a year. Christine, does this surprise you at all, given what you've seen?
No, not at all. I think that I think we've seen a huge shift, at least from when I was in the legacy market up to the legal market, in that we're seeing a huge hockey stick up for edibles, right? Edibles are cheaper, right? They're cheaper to buy. I mean, the eighths in California are still pretty high. Infused edible flower is also pretty high, even though we're in a market compression. So I think that we see, and I think the other thing that's really important is that for many of my generation and the generations after us, millennial, Gen Zs, this is a grocery store item. Like, it's like milk, eggs, cannabis. Like, it's like part of that. Like, you could have money for nothing else, but you're going to have money for your cannabis. And I say that as myself because, I use it medically. So it is something that I budget into my, daily, purchasing. I probably purchase more than 2 or 3 times a month just because I use it every day. And so I think this really is on track for it. I think what we're going to see, and I'm going to tell any of the new dispensary people coming up from the East Coast, is that really look at your edible line, because we're seeing edibles just really taking off, beverages taking off as well, because you can get, 100 milligrams for like $15, right? As opposed to getting like 42%, THC that's infused, right? Like not just regular flower. And those are still costing you 40 or 50. So I definitely think this tracks with what I've seen.
And that's a really good point. And we're going to get to kind of the patterns with which people attend or go to a dispensary. But New Frontier recently released our report on archetypes. And there's the emergence of this archetype, the lifestyler archetype. And we talk about it in terms of contemporary medical and legacy lifestylers. But these are folks like, that you're describing. They work cannabis into their life. It's their grocery store item. They have a regular cadence of, how often they purchase, they have the products that they like, and they just kind of work it into their daily schedule. I've got to go to the dry cleaner, I've got to go to the pet food store, and I've got to go to the dispensary. And it's just kind of on their list of things to do rather than this very novel shopping experience. That isn't true for all of the archetypes, but the folks that are kind of weaving it into their lifestyle, we're really starting to see that emerge.
And I think we really want all of the archetypes that y'all have identified, especially like new consumers. This is something exciting. This is something, a little bit like, oh, should I be doing it? I'm feeling a little bit dangerous, right? I think that what we're trying to do, and what all dispensary owners and dispensary folks should be doing, is making it a daily thing, right? I personally don't want it to be something that people just do once, because I feel like, or that they feel like, I'm being salacious by going to the dispensary. I want them to feel like, I'm going to the CVS, I'm going to the Safeway, I'm going to the Albertsons. And the reason I want them to feel that way is because I want them to keep coming back. So if we continue to, in my opinion, again, all my opinion, if we continue to try to make dispensaries into like these, mega marts, we're kind of losing that, like, we're here to help you. We're here to make sure that you get the best product for what you need. Not every product on our shelf is for you. And we're kind of we're almost losing that sort of really kind of the thing that makes stores, local stores, neighborhood stores so important. The people, the product, you can get that. And it's not that you don't want to go to the Mega Mart. Like, you still want to go to Planet 13 when you go to Las Vegas, shout out. You still want to do that. But also when you come home, you want to go to your, I call them the normal dispensary bodegas, right? Like I go to every time, my neighborhood one. And again, it's not so that you don't go to other ones or experience other types, but I really want to normalize. I want to normalize it. I remember when Apple came out, they were super exciting, but now Apple's like, I go to Apple, get my stuff, pick up my phone, get my stuff fixed. It's not odd anymore. It's not outside of my normal scope of my daily routine. And that's really what I want cannabis to be.
And I think we're definitely getting there. And I think that looking at these data is one way to really to understand that. So looking at, for example, kind of, do you keep cannabis around? So, are people just going to the dispensary and saying, I'm here, I'm buying exactly the amount I'm going to consume today, and then I'm not having any left? And no, that's not what people are doing. And of course, we know this from illicit market days, right? I mean, you were going to buy as much as you could at that time because you didn't know when you were going to have access to it again. So
That's
there
right.
wasn't this idea of like, I want to smoke a joint, so I'm just going to buy a joint. It was, how much can you sell me? How much can I afford? Because I want to keep it around. And I think that mentality has definitely carried over into legalization. So, when we look at how much people have around, we see that 54% of folks say they usually or always have cannabis somewhere. Right. So these aren't people that are running out of cannabis and then they wait like a week before they go get more. These are folks that have a supply on hand that usually are going to go re-up before their supply runs out. And as you mentioned, a lot of these folks are medical consumers. And this isn't a matter of wanting to have cannabis around. This is a matter of making sure they get their medical needs met. And sure enough, when we look at the reasons for consuming, whether they're primarily medical or only medical, in the dispensary population versus the general population of consumers, we definitely see a higher rate of medical consumers using dispensaries. And I think that, it's the consistency, it's the access, not having to be afraid that you're going to run out. It's the access to a wider variety of products that have been tested and packaged, that you have confidence as a medical consumer that it is what you think it's going to be. And then indeed, when we look at the primary reasons for use among dispensary consumers, even though relaxation usually tops out pain management, when we look at the general population, pain management is edging out things like reducing anxiety and relaxation among the dispensary consumer. Do you have thoughts on the use of dispensaries by the medical consumer as opposed to a recreational consumer, even though most are both?
Yes, I agree with that. Of course, I always say everything recreational is medical in some point, but I think that for me as a medical patient, and I'll speak to myself and then other people that I know that are in my circle, is that we appreciate going into dispensaries, not only to buy the thing that we've always bought, but also to see what's new, what's out there. Cannabis technology is constantly evolving, right? I mean, we all remember, at least you and I, Amanda, where you had brownies and they tasted so bad and you still got like some of the leaf in it, like old school, right? And then they got better, and then they got, distillate, isolate, resin, like got all these things in which you could infuse. Then you had nano. So, we've gone through that. So it's always evolving. There's always new things that might be better for you, because we are an evolving industry. So I think that for medical patients, we're going, and I know I do, like there's certain things that I buy and I've been buying since I started using cannabis for medical. But then there's also stuff that I try that's new because I'm like, oh, this is a new technology. Oh, this is a new way of consuming. Oh, this is a new taste. Oh, this is a new way to do that. And we want to always evolve as an industry, but I think consumers also want to evolve with the industry, and they're very open to trying new things, which is why I think medical patients go. I know that's why I go into dispensaries. I go into dispensaries specifically to be able to see what else is on the market.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. And as brands out there become more differentiated in targeting their consumers and what they say they're offering consumers, and it's not just kind of this blanket cannabis product, but it's, infused with CBN to help with sleep, or this is specifically designed for women. My local dispensary that I go to, they have a whole shelf with just sleep products that have CBN in them. And that was something that did not exist even
Right.
just a while ago. It was well known that cannabis could help with sleep, but things that were being formulated specifically for sleep, that wasn't something that was on the market. So I absolutely agree that, going to the dispensary is getting your needs met, but it's also kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of what else might be coming down the road that is beneficial to you. And I think for some consumer archetypes like savvy connoisseurs or engaged explorers, part of their love of cannabis is the novelty, right? It's what's new, it's what's interesting, it's what's different. And then for a lot of the medical patients, it's more of a necessity. They're trying to hone in on which product is going to help them most completely. And to know that, you have to really understand where the technology is going and what's available.
And that's where the bud tenders become so important that you were talking about earlier, because they are your knowledge base. When you go in there, you want to talk to somebody who knows, tell me about this new product, tell me about this new tincture. And I think that they are just the most important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. So I want to answer one of these questions really quickly. So we had someone just quickly ask about other types of slicing and dicing of demographic data, including things like ethnicity. So for this report, we just kind of broke it down by age and gender. However, I will point you to the New Frontier Data website and our consumer report series that dives a lot deeper into the demographics of different consumer groups, different archetypes. So I would highly recommend, if you really want to do a deeper dive into demographics, you can download those reports for free from our website. Okay, so let's move on to how much people are spending and when they visit the dispensary, and how often they're purchasing only from licensed sources. Because one of the things I want to point out is that 78% of dispensary consumers are only purchasing from licensed sources. So again, this could go back to the relationship between the dispensary consumer and using for medical purposes, and people feeling more comfortable buying medical products from places where they feel the product is tested and regulated. But if you're a retailer out there or a brand, know that these folks that are coming in the dispensary, they're pretty loyal to dispensaries. And so I think that that's interesting information. Also, the when do you visit the dispensary? So Christine, this gets exactly to what you were talking about before, about this idea of like, I'm just out and about and a dispensary is one of the places I go. So 48% of dispensary visitors say that they usually visit the dispensary when they're already outside the house, meaning that they're not making dedicated trips to the dispensary. They're combining it. They're, on their way home from work, or, when they happen to be out running other errands. And, 33% say they usually make an independent trip to the dispensary, meaning that they are just going out to a dispensary, but definitely almost half are looking at their dispensary visit as just part of their daily routine.
Errands. Yeah, they're errands.
They're errands. Exactly. So, this really speaks to what you were saying about it's kind of just one of those vital places you go, like the grocery store, where it's, it's necessary, it's regular, and you have a good sense of what you're trying to get out of the experience. And I think that dispensaries for a lot of folks, especially in stable, more mature markets, have definitely become that. I think in emerging markets where folks haven't had access before, it's almost like a kid in a candy store. You want to try out the different places. You want to see what kind of speaks to you, but people settle into habits. And I remember when I did my first study on medical cannabis patients, which was back in 2005, and I asked them why they chose that particular dispensary or why they come back to that particular dispensary. And the top three answers were familiarity, a feeling of comfort, and they knew what to expect. And I think that, and I'm curious to what you think about this, Christine, also having been in this industry for a while, but I still feel that this undercurrent of like, I'm going to do something wrong. I'm going to pick up a product I'm not supposed to. I'm going to open something I'm not supposed to. I'm not going to show my ID to the right person. Because at the beginning, there were a lot of rules when you went into a dispensary about what you were and were not allowed to do. So I'm wondering if you think that, people's loyalty to dispensaries, if part of that comes from just being familiar with the process of purchasing there.
I mean, I think that is absolutely true. I think it's true across all demographics, genders, and racial folks, different types of races. But I think that each group has a different thing, right? Like all of us, everybody on this call, everybody in the cannabis industry was in some way affected by the propaganda that the government put on us around cannabis being reefer madness, gateway drug, all of, all the things that they did. So we're combating that. And part of that is like, we're afraid, are we doing something wrong? Is the police going to come get us? And it's different for every group type, right? It's very different. But I think that what we're trying to do as an industry, and I think what retailers are really good at doing as retailers, and what the bud tenders inside the retailers are really good at doing, is trying to bring people comfort. Yes, this is totally normal for you to come in here. We know what we're talking about with our product. We can answer your questions. And I think that that is such an important thing for us as an industry to do, because we're not just combating like, oh, this is a new industry, like the first time we saw Facebook, right? That was, oh, that's something new, we have to learn it. No, this is something that, oh, people died for this, and they went to prison for this, and they were, stopped on the street and frisked, and they were doing, there's a whole thing that sits on that as retailers, as dispensary owners, as bud tenders, we have to be really cognizant of, so that when you see somebody coming in of color and they look uncomfortable, what do you as a dispensary make them feel comfortable in your space about, being that you don't know what their history is and what their, you know, PTSD is around just buying an eighth. I mean, because it's
Yes.
a lot, right? Just think about back in our day, Amanda, back here in the Bay Area, how many times that our friends and family get busted by the DEA or something terrible happened. So it's a generational trauma that dispensaries are really having to deal with on top of just trying to sell weed.
Oh, 100%. And, you know, there were back in the day, we would conduct raid trainings for patients and tell patients
Yeah.
what to do if you were inside a dispensary and the feds came and raided it, which actually would happen. And so, you know, there is that trauma that comes from prohibition about what it means to be in a dispensary, to purchase cannabis, for people to see you go into a dispensary and purchase cannabis. And so I totally agree with you that this is something that retailers have to keep in mind when they're trying to create environments that are friendly and that feel right. All right, so let's move off of that topic for a minute and get more into products. So, I mean, really no surprise here. Flower is queen. You know, that's definitely both the most favorite form and the most frequently used form by people that go into dispensaries. But to your point about edibles, so edibles are the favorite form for 27% of dispensary consumers, but the most frequent form for only 23%, which tells me that there are people that would like to access more edibles, that would like to use more edibles, but feel like they aren't able to access them in the dispensary, or maybe they don't like what there is to offer in the dispensary. So it's not a huge difference, but I'm curious if you have thoughts about why the favorite form would be 27%, but less are actually able to use that as their most frequent form.
I think so many people have had bad experience with edibles. Like, that's what I think it is. I think it is that, and since the beginning, like we were talking, early brownies and all that stuff, people have had really terrible experiences. Like, they got a small thing and they're like, oh yeah, and popped it in and didn't realize it was 100 milligrams, right? Like, this has happened to so many people. Or they took 10 milligrams, but they really shouldn't have taken 10 milligrams because of their body type, and they ended up being couch locked for 8 hours. Like, I think people have had really terrible experiences with edibles. So like, they like it because it's easier, you know, you don't have to smoke it, especially if you don't want to be smoking. But there's just a bad experience. At everybody, talk to anybody and say, like, have you had a bad experience with edibles? Everybody has an edible story. Everybody does. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why. But that's what I'm telling you. Technology is fast approaching us. You know, there's a new product out that has a protein that goes directly into your bloodstream, so you don't get couch locked. There's different types of emulsions coming out. We're starting to see really R&D on how to be able to take edibles. That's why I think edibles will be the hockey stick as soon as we get descheduling or rescheduling and can actually able to do clinical trials about how to deliver cannabis to the system. Because we have been kind of just out here in the Wild West trying to figure it out. And there's stuff that's coming. But I think that that's really the reason. It's that we've had bad experience with edibles.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The predictability of edibles can be really tough, even with tested products on the market, because of the length of onset. And I know that one of the things that beverages has really, you know, kind of come along with the nano-emulsion technology and tried to deliver a more effective and efficient dose where people are feeling it much quicker, so they're better able to titrate. And I do think that smokable flower, you know, it remains on top, partially because it's what people know, and partially because it's still the best way to titrate your dose. And for individuals that are new or afraid they're going to consume too much, they know that they can take, you know, one little puff of flour and pretty quickly tell if they need more. So I do agree with you, especially among dispensary consumers, who are people that kind of trend towards the medical use, and people that may be looking for more stability in their product choice, that, you know, some of these other form factors like edibles, like beverages, may start to overtake flower in those sectors.
But also, I think pricing is so important, right? I think that the pricing of edibles is just like, you can get 100 milligrams of gummies for 20 bucks, right? And, you know, that can last you quite a long time. And I just think that there's, and also with the beverages, as you were talking about, we're going to see people starting to be more conscious of what they spend And at this point where we are, at least in California and some of the surrounding states, what we're seeing is that it is cheaper to buy an edible or a beverage than it is to buy flour, even during a market compression. And in a place where we are suffering from inflation, you're going to see a trend of people being like, how can I get the most bang for my buck?
Yep, absolutely. And we are seeing that. So, we're seeing people spend less on cannabis, but not necessarily purchase less cannabis.
Right,
So
exactly.
that tells me is that their baskets look different, and people are looking for bulk deals. People are looking for more inexpensive ways to get the same amount of THC, as you're saying. So, I think that that's absolutely something that we're going to continue to see. And if you look down here at monthly flower consumption, there may be an assumption that people who use dispensaries are either very heavy flower consumers or very light flower consumers, but it's pretty even across the board. Once you get beyond under a gram, between a gram and more than an ounce, it really doesn't differ that much in percentage points. So I think that one of the things we're seeing is that dispensaries are starting to become a place for everybody, for the person that uses a couple times a year, the person that's using just for medical use at night, the person that's using multiple times a day, that dispensaries are really offering things to a wide variety of consumption groups.
And they need to offer a wide variety of products. I think that that's also something that we're going to start seeing a lot in that dispensary experience. It's not that you just have the top 5 brands, that everybody knows. People are also looking for a curated experience. So as a dispensary, if you want to really have a dispensary experience, you do have those top 5 brands that everybody knows about, but you also have other brands that are niche. You were talking about CBG, we're talking about THCVA, there's so many different things. So as a dispensary experience, I want to not see the same 5 folks. I don't want to see those. If that's your whole wall, I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else, even if you have something. So really, as a dispensary experience, I just highly recommend, especially for new retailers that are coming online, you have access and should demand access to as many different types of products. And you might be like, well, I might not sell so many of those. Well, you won't sell so many of those if you don't have them in your store. You have no idea what the consumer is looking for. And I will tell you, some of the things that I've seen just take off, or things I would have never guessed would be the thing that the consumer wanted. So I would really recommend that you start to really think about your product offering and really expand it in a way that you can, for your own bottom line. But please, please don't just think I can only get the top 5 brands, the top 10 brands. Really do your research about who's putting out good product, and then have your bud tenders push that.
Yeah, that's so important. And, looking here at the most important information that someone's looking for when they're buying flour is the effect that the flour will have. And we had a question come up about, should brands kind of be leaning into this effect marketing of, sleep or reductions in anxiety? And, as a scientist, I have mixed feelings about that, because the consumers want it. I mean, the consumers obviously want it, across the board. The number one thing they want to know is, how's this going to make me feel? On the other hand, we know that because everybody has individual endocannabinoid systems, and because cannabis is so vulnerable to setting, and other things that are going on with your body, that effect can be one of the hardest things to predict. And, as the science evolves and we start to learn about some of these minor cannabinoids and the therapeutic potential that they have, I think that brands can start leaning in a little bit more to effect marketing. But flour is tough. Take into account that very few places do any kind of terpene analysis, which is a huge piece of the puzzle that folks are missing. I think it's really tough to talk about what effect the product will have, and especially with flour. And I think that that's reflected in these loyalty statistics. So people who consume flour, say that, yeah, they like to try different strains. They like to try things that they have tried and that they haven't tried. But they say that they would rather buy an unfamiliar strain from a favorite brand than a favorite strain from an unfamiliar brand. And so, if I love, let's just say, Log Cabin from Mendocino Grasslands, for example, and then I go into the dispensary and they don't have any, as the typical dispensary consumer, I would rather buy Mimosa from Mendocino Grasslands than Log Cabin from some brand that I don't know. And so for flower, there definitely seems to be a recognition of who's growing quality flower and a willingness to try different strains from that same brand or same farm because you believe in the quality of that product. So Christine, any thoughts about flower loyalty?
I mean, I think that that's true. I think that definitely people know, especially in California. I don't know how this is going to be for the new markets coming up, but in California, we know who grows good weed. We do. And we know who grows bad weed. We know that too. And I mean, there's a place for everybody. Some people will buy the bad weed because it's super cheap. Some people will buy the good weed on holidays. Like, it's such a weird way in which we do stuff. But I agree with that. I think for me personally, I tend for flower because flower is harder than anything, right? There's so many factors on how flower is going to turn out during harvest, right? Whether you're doing indoor, outdoor, mixed light, whatever it is. And so you want to just kind of trust that the grower is growing what you want them to grow in the same quality, even if it's going to be slightly different because the sun was different that day. Like, there's so many things that happen for flower. So that's why I think that we see a lot of people really follow the farm, right? Because they know the grower on that farm. I mean, you see that. You've done so much work up there that you're like, this guy does fire, this woman does fire, and this other group doesn't. But they're, eighth is only $18. So cool. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things.
I will say though, Christine, in my diatribe on the backwards nature of cannabis consumption, some of the most inexpensive flower in the entire state of California is sun-grown regenerative organic cannabis that's being grown by craft producers. So,
and they're delicious.
And it's amazing. So, and I think that, what you're saying from a dispensary perspective is really think about who is the producer, and the fact that if your customer finds that a producer of flower in your store is something that they rely on and that they are loyal to, they will stick with that producer, even if they change up their strains, or even if they have something that may not be available anymore. And if that's who you are as a dispensary, then that's kind of a branding and marketing angle. I'll mention the dispensary that I attend. I live in Mendocino County, so in the Emerald Triangle, and I go to a dispensary plant shop. And their focus is local flower. So they have a whole case that's just sun-grown flower from Mendocino County. And some of these farmers only grow one thing. They're very small, they grow one thing, but it's amazing. And so that's really how they've marketed themselves. If you want to find local flower, if you want things that are grown outdoors, regenerative, organic, this is the place to go. So instead of just trying a mishmash of a whole different things and hoping something sticks, they are specifically going after consumers who care about that type of flower, which I think is really brilliant. And I think it's worked out really well for them because they know that people are going to be loyal to those producers, no matter what strain of theirs is being put on the shelf.
Now I have a question for you, Amanda, because we're seeing this market compression in California. Do you think consumers, based on the data, are loyal to the farmers where the prices are higher? Or do you think there seems to be this feeling around the larger companies that everybody's racing to the bottom? We have $5 eighths. Like, I see this, there's in Oakland, this huge billboard that's like, $10 for a whole ounce. What kind of ounce, right? So do you think, with New Frontier data, that people are loyal enough to the flower producers to be like, I'm still going to spend $40, even though there's this other flower sitting right next to you that's going to be $10? Like, what are y'all seeing over there? I'm just really curious, because I'm so upset about the race to the bottom that everybody's doing here in California. It makes me sad, and it just feels so bad because it's not good quality product. And why are we in dispensaries allowing that to continue to happen in our state?
Well, I think from the data that we're seeing here would say that they will still buy the $40 eighth if it's somebody that they appreciate and that they trust as a producer, rather than try a strain that they like from an unknown source. But I think one of the things we're really missing in the cannabis research field is research on price elasticity. So in alcohol, for example, we have a whole sector of research that just focuses on how expensive does alcohol have to get before people change what they're doing. And it's one of the ways that we determine taxes, right? So how much tax can we put on alcohol where it deters consumption, but at the same time doesn't make people move to more dangerous or high alcohol, less quality products. And because of the prohibition, we haven't really been able to do that type of price elasticity research in cannabis. So we're not really sure, is really the answer. At what price? Is it $30 an eighth? Is it a 10% increase that's going to move somebody into something else? But if we look at other types of industries that aren't that different from our own, I mentioned alcohol. I don't like to use alcohol as a comparison. I prefer to use coffee. Most coffee drinkers are not drinking the craft, single origin, single batch, fair trade coffee. Most coffee consumers are drinking Starbucks or Folgers or chock full of nuts or whatever it is in their neck of the woods that they're buying in the tin so that they can get their caffeine fix in the morning. And so, like that with cannabis, I would expect that we would see the Starbucks or the Budweiser or, that type of brand, and that it probably will attract numbers wise, the majority of consumers, if this is anything like coffee or like beer. But there will be a craft market. I think the problem is that because the prices are so funky right now, and you see the small batch craft cannabis going for $10 an eighth, and you see the, mass produced kind of like indoor multi-state cannabis going for $60 an eighth, the consumer doesn't know where the quality lies because they're used to paying more for a quality product. And I saw a question about, interest in organic edibles, if people are interested in organic flower. I mean, we're still seeing scenarios where people are buying organic fruits and vegetables, and they're going to farmers markets and they're driving electric cars, but that behavior is not yet translating into what they look for at the dispensary. And so we're going to talk about bud tenders in a few minutes here, but I think, that's where this question becomes, are bud tenders there to push product that the store tells them they want to get rid of or that they're trying to highlight? Is their job to educate the consumer on what might be best for them, regardless of what the dispensary thinks they want to get out the door? And do they have the extra added bonus responsibility of helping consumers better understand what quality in the marketplace looks like? When we look at wine, for example, wine that's labeled as coming from Sonoma County has an automatic bump in kind of legitimacy because it comes from a region that's very well known. We haven't quite figured out how to do that in cannabis yet. Folks down in Southern California don't really know about Mendocino or Humboldt for the most part and what's here. So there's a whole lot that has to go on behind the scenes until we get to that point where consumers are really understanding why things are priced differently and are seeking out certain types of product beyond just what we're seeing here, which is the effect that it's going to have.
And I also think understanding, and this is a weird thing, but I know that I do this, maybe I'm a nerd, but I read the COAs. Like I read them. I want to know what's in them. I want to know, is it good, bad, or indifferent? But I want to know, and I don't think there's a lot of people that would do that. Maybe there are, but I read the COAs because they're important to know, like, what are you putting in your body? And we don't, it's a different thing than like wine or beer. Like they have the ingredients on there, but like, there's so much other stuff that happens for the consumer. Like we don't have to do that for corn, right? That's the plant that grows out. We don't have to do that for, avocados, right? Everything's done in the back end through the FDA, but we're having to make these decisions and learn how to read these very complex, certificates of analysis on that one product that we're using. And I think that that's a very interesting thing.
Oh, absolutely. And, so in California, they launched not too long ago, the OCal program, which is an organics program that is supposed to be in parallel with the federal program so that when the day comes, when these companies can actually have federal organic certifications that they'll be able to. But one thing we don't know yet is whether having the OCal label makes people more likely to buy your cannabis. We know that Californians like organic things, but how that translates to cannabis when folks are still a little bit in this prohibition mentality, that remains to be seen a little bit. So I think these are some of the questions we want to answer is what piece of information about this do consumers want to know in order to feel more comfortable or compelled to purchase it? So let's move a little bit on to non-flower. So, we don't see things that are that completely different from flower here. People are usually purchasing from the same non-flower brands. Sometimes they alternate, that's kind of half and half. So now, looking at dispensary loyalty, this kind of gets to what we used to see back in the day when I did research on this, 20 years ago, which is 65% of dispensary customers always buy from the same store. So that's loyalty to a store. Right. And I think a lot of what's driving this, again, like we talked about, is a feeling of comfort, security, knowing what's expected of them, knowing what's going to happen when they go in the store, knowing, kind of loosely what products are going to be available to them. So do you have comments about the 65% always purchasing from the same store?
I mean, I think that's on track to what we have experienced. I mean, we would have people who would drive past other dispensaries, especially when we were in Oregon. There was 100 dispensaries on the Green Mile, like literally so many, but they would drive past your dispensary to go to their favorite dispensary. They would drive other dispensaries to come to our dispensary because they wanted to. And it wasn't just about the flower, it was about the supporting of that dispensary. I think that that's something that dispensaries really have to think about. Especially the 150 new dispensaries that are going to come up in New York, that your biggest success is making sure that people will pass other people's stores to get to you. And I think that that's the other thing. It's like, it's not just flower, edibles, what do you have there, but it's the experience like we're talking about. And it's also, I am not surprised that that's that much loyalty. If you go to a place where you feel comfortable, you feel like you're getting safe product, you feel like everybody knows your name. For those of you who don't know Cheers, that's a Cheers thing. You're going to go to the same thing, right? You're going to go to the same thing. I want to have that feeling every time. I want to come in and be like, Norm, I want people, like, we know people's name in our dispensaries. I know your name. I know what you, and this is before we had data, before I could be like, look what you got in the POS system. This is when I just knew that you always liked sativa because I knew you by face. So I think that that is absolutely a real thing. And I think that this is an important thing to note. If you are a new dispensary owner going for one of the licenses in the newly minted Missouri and Maryland, if you're coming into New York, if you're looking at Connecticut, you need to really be considering this particular thing, because it's not just about your flower, but it's how you make them feel. They will come back to you 65% of the time. That's unheard of. That's amazing. That is like next level. So really be thinking about, how do I capture my 65%?
Yeah, and that's such a great point beyond just the products that you offer, right? It's what kind of experience are you giving people? How are you making them feel? And how are you representing yourself in the community? I mean, one of the reasons that I go to the dispensary I go to is because they're very big players in the community. They have community events, they show up, they support the farmers, it's a woman-owned dispensary. So there's things about the dispensary and who they are and what they represent that are in line with who I am and who I represent. And so therefore I want them to succeed. We have a lot of dispensaries in my community. I want them to succeed. And, on that line of, every time I go in there, they all know who I am. I brought my parents there. I'm always telling people to go there. And so it feels like a nice time when I'm there, and it's fun. It's not just like a chore, like, going to the grocery store, although I like my grocery store too, because it's a co-op. All right, so let's talk about changing dispensaries, because 65% of people are saying, nope, I go to the same dispensary. But for the 35% that are changing dispensaries, what makes them change dispensaries? Well, unsurprisingly, and there was a question that I want to kind of address in this answer, which was about, different than kind of coffee and alcohol cultures, because of prohibition, do we see people be more loyal in the cannabis space? Are we seeing them want to support small producers and small brands because they kind of feel this loyalty? And I do think that there's some of that there. And I think we'll see more of that as the market matures. But right now it's price.
Definitely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So 54% of people that went to a different dispensary did so because there was a sale or a promotion in some other store that they wanted to take advantage of. And then speaking to the fact that a lot of people are doing these as errands when they're out and about, half of the people said that they visited a different one because a different business was nearby. So they were running an errand, there happened to be a different dispensary nearby, they had a chore, they had to pick up some cannabis, they went to this different dispensary. So I think not that different than why we would see people go to a different grocery store or go to a different pet food store.
Convenience.
Convenience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when we ask people about their decision to switch dispensaries, the location, the product quality, the product selection, which you would expect, but 75% of people said it was very or extremely important was the knowledge and friendliness of the staff. And I want to point out that that actually beat out price in how important these different factors were in someone's decision to switch dispensaries. So price, very important, but when we look at why people are switching, what's most important besides quality and convenience is the staff. So let's talk a little bit about bud tenders, because we had a question that came in that said, bud tenders, they're sales associates, they are there to give information and to help people understand the products that are in front of them, but how much knowledge are they really imparting about how to use cannabis therapeutically? Some states require that there's medical directors involved in dispensaries. And given that we're seeing is that dispensary consumers are leaning towards kind of the primarily medical or mostly medical group, what does that mean for the amount of knowledge that the bud tender should hold? So, if we look at how bud tenders are helping people, mostly they're giving some guidance about products before purchasing. They are helpful if people need assistance for recommending products or helping people find a product that they like. But fewer people are addressing what kind of experience that people are looking for. It's still very much, what is this product and what does it do and which product should I select, like a personal shopper more than someone who is interested in helping them with cannabis. So, we know about kind of the older dispensaries, the beginning, a lot of this was teaching people how to use different types of cannabis, how to get kind of their therapeutic needs met. So Christine, what role do you see for kind of the modern day bud tender, recognizing that some people just want to know, which product should I choose or what do you have on sale today? And some people come in thinking, I've never used cannabis before, or I haven't used it in 20 years. I'm trying to deal with insomnia. Help me. So what does the modern bud tender need to be? And what kind of training do you think they need to have?
Well, I think they need to have a lot of training. I think that that's super important. For our products, we use a company where we've trained the bud tenders pretty extensively on our products so that they can speak about them in a very knowledgeable way. But I would tell you, like, one of the things that we're really pushing is it's not enough anymore, in my opinion, to just tell people use this because you're like, I'm having insomnia. What do I use? Use this. You got to tell them why they need to use this so that they are empowered. We need to not have consumers that feel so uncomfortable. They need to be able to walk in and go to a bud tender and be like, I need CBN. This is what I'm going to use it for. What products do you have that has that? What I'm usually doing a 2-to-1, but I'm going to try a 40-to-1. We want to empower our consumers to understand this. So it's not enough to just say, hey, you should get this if you want to sleep. It's good for sleeping. Tell them why so that they're empowered the next time they come in. Maybe you don't have that product the next time and it got discontinued or not carried anymore, whatever the case may be. You don't want the consumer to come in and be like, tell me again what I need. You want them to be like, last time I took this, it was this, 1-to-1, 40-to-1, 20-to-1, whatever. This is what I was looking for, because you don't want to keep, it's to me a waste of time to keep just telling them what to get. And they don't ever have any knowledge and they don't feel any empowerment about the medicine that they're about to take, the cannabis they're about to ingest or smoke, whatever it might be. So I think bud tenders in the new phase of dispensaries have to explain the cannabinoids that they're using, which really up until like a couple of years ago was not a thing, right? It was not a thing. The terpenes, the tasting, none of that was a thing. It is a thing now. And for new markets, I know I keep pointing to New York because it is such a new market. Like we had people come here to Hall of Flowers that came in. They were like, blown away. They're like, I can't believe this exists in the planet. And it does exist. So we want to make sure bud tenders are not only really knowledgeable, but that they are making sure that their customer is feeling empowered to come into the store in 2 weeks and ask for what they need by name, not by brand, but by name, by terpene, by cannabinoid, because that is a loyal customer who's now knowledgeable. And this is just like on the profit side, you don't take 10 minutes to get through the basket, you take 2 minutes because you've taught them in the first round. So all those people in the new markets, take the time to teach them in the first round. You'll be able to move more people through your store, which gives you a better bottom line.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that last piece, because I know that that's something that people are really thinking about. And, the first thing that you were talking about really reminds me of kind of that old adage about teaching a person to fish versus giving a person a fish. And so right now, when a bud tender is just basically saying, oh, you need sleep, here, take this, it has CBN, it's good. That's really just giving someone a fish. And every time they come in, you're going to have to give them a fish over and over again. But if you teach them how to fish, if you teach them what to ask for, if you teach them about ratios, if you teach them about minor cannabinoids, then they're going to know how to fish, and they're going to come in and they're going to be loyal to you because you're the one that helped them and taught them. And if they have additional questions, they're going to want to ask you about it. But they're going to come in and they're going to explore products, and it is going to move things a lot more quickly.
And I think it's important that all your bud tenders have the same kind of training, like not this piecemeal, I train you here, I train you there. And there was a question saying, like, who is this company you're talking about? I'm not sure if I'm able to say companies on here, that do this kind of training, but making sure all the bud tenders are trained in the same way with the same information, so that if you're in the store one day and you do a great job selling somebody, but your day off and they come to me, I'm not like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I've never heard that. Like, I've had this happen in dispensaries where I'm like, hey, I was talking to X, Y, and Z, and they were telling me about this, and it was really good, and I wanted to get some more information. They'd be like, blank. They'd be like, yeah, I don't know what that is. So also training all your bud tenders the same way is important. And it's gone beyond those PADs. It's gone beyond those in-store things. Now there's entire, technology where everybody can have the same training. They go and they have quizzes, and it's great because then you have a fully trained staff that knows about every single one of the products exactly the same way. So no matter who comes into your store and talks to either Amanda or to me, they're going to get the same information. It is a streamlined way to do it. It also makes you look really good as a dispensary.
Oh, absolutely. That was such great advice. And there are a lot of bud tender training programs out there. So folks can kind of investigate what makes the most sense for you and your staff, can, based on the size and what you're looking to accomplish. There was also a question about, are there apps and abilities for people to track how products are working for them so that they can come back and ask for specific products?
There are actually.
There are.
Yes, there are. Yeah, like that's what's cool,
Yeah. There's some great apps out there for patients and for consumers that they can just download. They can enter in the product that they use. They can enter in what helped them. And then they can bring that information back to the dispensary to say, last time I tried this, it didn't do very well, but this worked really well. Do you have any more? If they don't, they can help match something that's similar. So this is that process of empowering the consumer to know how to ask for what they need.
And it's also empowering the staff, right? I think that empowerment of the staff is so important in relationship to the empowerment of the consumer. And so that's what I would tell new dispensary owners, current dispensary owners. It is time for you to move to the next level of training, of engagement with your frontline staff, with your essential workers, right? It's like this is the moment in time for you to really make an investment in making sure. And also, really, really quickly, you are the dispensary experience. You own a dispensary, you run a dispensary, you are that person. Make your brands train the staff, however that works for you. I'm not telling you have to do technology, but you have to expect that before any brand gets on your shelf, that they have fully trained your entire staff, from your manager all the way down to your part-timer, all the way to, like, everybody needs to get trained. And so expect that and demand that, because you need that to be successful in your sales, but also in your customer retention.
Absolutely. And that's such a good point. I mean, there's so much education that brands can do that are talking points for how people use their products, with the benefits of their products, how their products are differentiated. And, there's definitely a sales component there, but again, there's an empowerment component there. So the more that the consumer knows about the ins and outs of the product, how to use it most effectively, the more likely they're going to have a good experience, which means they're going to want to come back because they associate your dispensary with having a good experience.
And I think that education also is a softer touch of sales instead of a hard sale. Like you got, like when you go in to see it, like a used car or like a regular car, the education allows you to do really soft sales in advance, and it feels more comfortable for most consumers to have a soft touch than a hard touch. Like, you got to buy this, got to buy it right now. And that's how I feel like when I go into like dispensaries. They're like 2 for 1, 5 for 1, 6 for 1. You're like all of these like specials, and I'm like, what is going on right now? That's like a hard sale, and it's really uncomfortable, super uncomfortable. So I think education is a really great way to do soft touches for people who may feel overwhelmed at the level of like, why is this 2 for 1? Does it suck? Like, that's me. Like, for me, I'm like, when I see stuff that's like 5 for 1, I'm like, this much really suck if they got to sell it for 5 for 1. So, like, that's just me. But I'm just saying, like, education is good in 2 ways. One, it's you're teaching people, and 2, it's a softer touch for sale.
Absolutely. And, inviting people to have connections with the farmers as well and with the producers, I think is really important. It's just like going to the farmer's market and like meeting the people that are like growing your fruit versus just kind of seeing it secondhand in a grocery store. And it also helps develop a connection, I think, from that as well. So we're getting close to the end. So I wanted to just go through some key takeaways. I'm going to roll in the answer to one of these other questions and one of these key takeaways. So if you have any other last minute questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. But these are just some of our key takeaways. These are things we've talked about during the webinar today. So, we've said this many, many times in many ways during this webinar, but dispensary consumers pick their primary dispensary based on familiarity, convenience, and product selection. So not that different from a grocery store or another place that people go, to get their needs met, but understanding that the impact that prohibition and the early days of dispensaries has had on the importance of familiarity and knowing what to expect for somebody that's going into a dispensary, especially in a newly legal state, where people are used to being very nervous when they go and produce or go and obtain cannabis. So it's still that lingers, right? Even when cannabis becomes legal. As we mentioned, that even though strain may be a poor indicator of the effect a product will have, it's still a very powerful tool for many dispensary consumers when it comes to making purchases, because it's something that they know. And so, they are looking for different strains that have brought them joy in the past, even though we know that strain name is not necessarily a reliable indicator about what's going to happen or what's inside the product. But we do see dispensary consumers primarily using flower products. But as Christine very rightly said, we expect to see a shift towards edibles and drinks and other manufactured products as those product verticals dial in the science around onset and around titration and some of the other issues that have kind of warded people off those products in the past. We mentioned that dispensary consumers are more likely to purchase an unfamiliar strain from a familiar brand than vice versa. So, because flower can be so variable and because strains can even be so variable, people stick with producers that they know, and producers where they know that the quality is going to be there every single time. We talked a bit about the value that bud tenders add to a shopper's experience, especially for new consumers. So in order to have repeat business, when someone's new, when they're just learning, you really have to meet them where they're at and not give them the hard sale, as Christine was saying, but really start with education. Because in the early days of dispensaries, like, there was no hard sale. I mean, all of the product was labeled under the dispensary name, and none of the edibles were labeled at all. So there were no brands. There was no, oh, you got it, except for Mickey Martin. He was the only one that had a brand with Tainted back in the day. But, it really wasn't about brands because there were no brands. So it really was education. And what are you trying to accomplish today? What experience are you looking for? What symptoms are you trying to address? And then trying to guide people towards products rather than starting with, hey, I have this great product. Is it right for you? And then finally, something that we didn't get into as much, but it is related to a question that we were asked, which was about people learning about products online ahead of time, and online education that can go to helping people understand different products and different cannabinoids before they even get in the store. And sure enough, we do find that most dispensary consumers check out a menu before shopping. So folks do want to know what they're in store for, what they're going to be looking at when they get into a dispensary. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially if it's one of these larger mega stores. And in some states like Illinois, you have to order online before you go there. There is no shopping experience. There's just you decide what products you want, and then you go into the dispensary and pick them up. So Christine, one kind of last question I have, and then we'll address any questions from the audience, is what can dispensaries, knowing that people are kind of going online for like a cursory look at what's available, how can dispensaries use online menus to infuse some of this education that we have been talking about, rather than just the hard sale of what they have on their shelf that day?
I think the use of your phone, like I always tell people, we have supercomputers in our hands now, right? And so really making your menu and your website mobile friendly is super important. Making sure that you're linked. Like if I'm looking at this edible and it says it has this particular cannabinoid, there should be a link that goes to that cannabinoid that says, this is what this cannabinoid does. It is not hard to do. As a company, if it says, oh, this has 23% THC, there should be a link to be like, what do these percentages mean? Because people are always like, I would like 72% THC. Why do you want 72% THC? What is it? Do you think you're going to get that much higher? You're really not. Like really understand that. So there should be a link on that where you go to and be like, here's what the percentages mean. This is what it means to your body. This is what it means to your high. This is what it means to your medicine. Like there needs to be that kind of deep dive. Some people will use it, some people will not, but having that empowers your consumer. And anytime you can empower your consumer, it is literally added revenue to your bottom line. I'm gonna say that one more time. When you empower your consumer, it's added revenue to your bottom line. So you should be if you have a menu, like in Illinois where you can only order, you should have so many links that people can really deep down and be like, so if I use this one, and I do this all the time, like if you like, just think about Amazon or think about any place where you shop online, you might look at 5 different of the same thing, by the way, the 5 different things and be like, okay, why would I buy this one over this one? So get that education within your menu, on your mobile apps, even on your website, but I think most people use mobile now, and really help your consumers understand the difference and understand what they're buying. It's going to make all of the difference in the future of your of consumers. I'm talking like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It's going to make just all the difference for the industry, not just for your dispensary, but for your industry to have informed consumers.
So the takeaway here is that the dispensary experience starts before somebody walks into the dispensary.
That's exactly right.
And so if you can do some prep for them, if you can give them some information ahead of time that's going to make their decision-making happen more swiftly or more knowledgeably when they come into the dispensary, that's also cutting down on the amount of time that you're working with them in store, which is going to help cycle people through the store faster. So, the online opportunity is really big. And then we did have one question about marketing restrictions. Obviously, this becomes even more important given that dispensaries cannot advertise on social media. They cannot, a lot of SMS text messaging services are not working with dispensaries. So there's definitely a difficulty in reaching consumers. So I think a lot of the marketing comes down to quality and not quantity, and really making sure the information you're putting out there in the limited places we're allowed to put out information is really useful and helpful, and isn't just what a lot of other businesses do, which is just try to tell you so many times to come to their store that you just end up doing it. We don't really have that reach as a cannabis community, but we absolutely have the ability to bring people in with education, with having them have a good experience in the store. And as Christine was saying, really thinking about who is your target consumer? What types of products are they interested in? And it doesn't have to be just the top 5 that everybody else has. Thinking about what's local to you. Is the area where your dispensary exists have any small local manufacturers or cultivators that you can kind of hold up as being small or craft or local, and then having them come in and meet your customers? I mean, this is really how people become comfortable and familiar with a dispensary. And then as we we've seen, once they're comfortable and familiar, they're going to come back.
65%, 65%, nothing to sneeze at.
So just one other question I wanted to address. There are a lot of higher education opportunities right now for people that are getting involved in cannabis, and whether that's as a bud tender or someone in sales or retail or brand development, or people working in ancillary services. So if you're looking for education for your team, for yourself, there's a lot of great programs out there. So Christine, I think that we've taken people through the dispensary experience. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. So do you have any final thoughts for our audience about dispensaries?
I think one of the things that I would really consider, this is on the business tip, when we were talking about education, putting that stuff on your website through your mobile also is really good for your SEO. So people will be able to find you through your educational platform more than if you're saying, you know, 2 for 1, an eighth for $15. Like that is always flagged. So really using education, not only to educate, but also to drive traffic to your website, to your menu, is a very organic way to do it. Because as Amanda said, we don't have access to nothing, not Shopify, not Instagram, kind of on LinkedIn. So how do you grow your organic following? And that really, to me, and what has been helpful for us is education as the way to get in to how do I buy cannabis from your company.
I love it. I love it. Education forward, you know, that really honors the history also of cannabis and, you know, kind of how we started this, which was people needed access to a plant where talking about it, educating about it was forbidden. And dispensaries became a place not only to allow access, but to bring that education finally into the lives of consumers. And I think that's something dispensaries should continue, even if they are just the grocery store, the dry cleaner, the place you have to stop before you can go home at the end of the day. They're so much more than that, and will continue to be so. So I want to thank you so much, Christine. This is just such a pleasure.
Thank you.
With you, and I just really appreciate everything you've brought and continue to bring to the industry. We're so grateful to have you as a leader in this space, and cannabis consumers are so better off for the fact that you give so much time, attention, effort, and heart into the work that you put in. So thank you. And for those that are watching, I hope you appreciated this. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you want to read more, we are going to repost this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it, you'll be able to share it. And you can go to our website, newfrontierdata.com, and you can download the Dispensary Experience Report for free. It's got all of the charts and more that we talked about today. It's got additional insights. And so I would highly recommend that you do that. If you're interested in the consumer behavior, the archetypes, we also have those available for download on our website as well. So get the data. You know, we're past the point where we can just put products out there for people who love weed. You know, we really have to start thinking about who is our audience, what do they want, what motivates them, and you can find all of that information in what we produce and offer to you for free. So check that out, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.